Hey Race, the first part of your intense and emotionally charged story. Each section will be long, full of twists, and gripping confrontations. The night I learned the truth, the world didn't end in some dramatic explosion. There was no cinematic thunderclap, no glass shattering, no grand moment of revelation. It was just a quiet Tuesday, the kind of night where you expect absolutely nothing to happen. And that was the cruelest part, how normal everything seemed before it all came undone. I got home late from work. The house was dim, the only light coming from the living room TV where my two daughters sat, half watching a show while scrolling on their phones. I greeted them, but they barely looked up, mumbling a hey in return. It wasn't unusual. They were teenagers. Indifference was their second language. My wife wasn't in sight. I assumed she was upstairs, maybe in the shower, maybe already in bed. I thought about grabbing a beer and sinking into the couch, but something nagged at me. The house felt off. Not in a way I could immediately put my finger on, just enough to make my skin prickle. Maybe it was the way my daughters had barely reacted to me walking in. Maybe it was the way the TV was playing, but neither of them seemed to be watching. Maybe it was nothing, but nothing had a way of turning into something. I went upstairs. The bedroom door was closed. I hesitated, hand hovering over the doorknob. I don't know why. It was my own damn house, my own damn bedroom. There was no reason for me to hesitate, no reason for my heart to be kicking against my ribs. But I stood there for a second longer than I should have, feeling like an intruder in my own life. Then I turned the handle. She wasn't in bed. She wasn't in the bathroom. She wasn't there at all. The bed was made, untouched. The closet door was slightly open, just a crack. I didn't remember leaving it that way. I reached out and pulled it wider. Her favorite purse was missing. The red one. The one she always took when she went somewhere important. I checked the time. 10:42 p.m. Where the hell was she? I walked back downstairs, trying to ignore the growing weight in my gut. My daughters were still in the same spots, but I noticed something new, the way they stiffened just slightly when they saw me again, like they'd been caught doing something they weren't supposed to. I kept my voice casual. Where's your mom? Silence. They looked at each other. A quick glance, a flicker of hesitation. A conversation passed between them in that single moment, one I wasn't supposed to be part of. That was when I knew. It was like the air had changed, like everything around me had shifted 1 inch to the left. My younger daughter, Sophie, spoke first. She's out. The pause before the last word was too long. A split second too deliberate. Out where? Another glance between them. My older daughter, Lily, sat up straighter. She just went to grab something. She'll be back soon. They were lying. Not poorly, not obviously, but just enough that I could feel the edges of the truth underneath it. And they were protecting her. That was what hit me the hardest. Not just that my wife was hiding something, but that my own daughters were in on it. I felt my pulse thud in my temples. I nodded slowly, as if I accepted their answer, and walked to the kitchen. Pulled out my phone. No texts from her. I called. No answer. I tried again. Straight to voicemail. I could feel something clawing up the inside of my chest, something raw and ugly, but I forced myself to stay calm. I opened the Family Tracker app on my phone, the one we all had installed for safety reasons. She had turned off her location. I stared at the screen, at the little message that said, "Location not available." She never did that. Never. I gripped the phone, my mind racing. Then, before I could even begin to process what was happening, I heard my daughter's voice, not speaking to me, not even in the same room, but her words drifted from the hallway, barely above a whisper, and they sliced through the air like a knife. "Dad has no idea about Mom's double life," she murmured. "She secretly takes us to see our half-siblings every Sunday while Dad is at work. I can't wait for Mom to leave Dad so we can finally live as one family. Plus, Mom's lover just bought a luxury car. Something Dad could never afford. Couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The world around me had gone completely still, like the moment before a crash. When you see it coming but there's nothing you can do to stop it. Half-siblings. One family. Mom's lover. The words rang in my head, bouncing around, colliding into each other. I wanted to believe I had misheard, that this was some kind of sick joke, that my own daughter wasn't sitting there, casually talking about my wife's second life like it was a TV drama she was invested in. I turned the corner and stepped into the hallway. She was still on the phone, her back to me, laughing softly, chatting, completely unaware that her entire world was about to change. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My throat was too tight, my hands clenched too hard. Then finally I spoke. "What the hell did you just say?" And just like that, everything unraveled. For a second, she didn't move, didn't even flinch. Then she turned around slowly, like she was hoping, praying that she had misheard me. Her face was pale, eyes wide, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something there I had never seen before. Fear. She fumbled with her phone, nearly dropping it before pressing it to her chest as if that would somehow undo what I had just heard. "Dad, say it again." My voice didn't sound like my own. It was low, calm, too calm. My pulse was slamming against my ribs, my skin burning hot. "Go ahead. Say it again." She looked like a trapped animal. I was just talking about your mom's secret life," I finished for her. "Talking about how she's been taking you to see your half-siblings. About how she's leaving me. About how her lover just bought a luxury car, something Dad could never afford." I repeated every word with slow, deliberate precision. "That's what you said, right?" Her lips trembled. "Dad, I didn't mean who were you talking to?" My voice was sharper now, cutting through her weak protests like a blade. She hesitated. Her fingers curled around her phone like it held the only answer that would save her. I took a step forward. "Who were you talking to?" She jumped at the sound of my voice. Then finally she mumbled, "Tyler." Tyler. Her boyfriend. I had never particularly liked the kid, but right now he wasn't the problem. He was just the unlucky recipient of whatever horrible truth my daughter had just spilled. I reached for her phone. She jerked back. "No. It's private." My patience snapped. "Private?" My voice echoed through the hallway. My other daughter, Sophie, appeared in the doorway of the living room, her face creased with worry. "You think this is private? You think it's okay to sit here in my house and talk about my wife's affair like it's AFING secret club meeting?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Dad, please," I held out my hand. "Phone. Now." She didn't move. I had never forced anything from my daughter before, never even raised my voice at her like this, but right now I couldn't think about that. I couldn't think about anything except the fact that my entire world had just collapsed and my own child had known about it. The betrayal wasn't just coming from my wife. It was coming from inside my own home. I grabbed the phone out of her hands before she could react. She let out a strangled sob, but I ignored it. My fingers were shaking as I opened her recent calls. Tyler's name was at the top. I tapped it. It rang. She gasped. "Dad, don't, too late." He picked up. "Hey, babe, this isn't your girlfriend," I cut in, my voice ice cold. Silence. Then a sharp inhale. Mr. Miller, tell me everything you know." His breathing turned uneven. I could hear his brain working, hear the exact moment he realized he was F-edition. I don't know what you mean." "Don't play stupid with me, Tyler," I snarled. "My daughter was just on the phone with you, spilling every disgusting detail about my wife's affair. So you're going to tell me everything right now?" I heard a shuffling sound like he was adjusting his grip on the phone. He hesitated, and I could almost picture him looking over his shoulder, debating whether or not he should hang up. Then he spoke. I thought you knew." Something in my chest twisted violently. "Excuse me. I mean, everyone kind of knows. At least, the people close to your family. I figured you were just ignoring it." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. "Everyone kind of knows." My legs nearly gave out. I gripped the door frame, trying to steady myself, trying to stop the room from tilting. "She's been seeing this guy for a long time," Tyler continued nervously. "I don't know exactly how long, but at least a couple years." Couple years. My stomach churned, bile rising in my throat. "She told Emily and Sophie about it last year," he added quickly, as if that little detail would somehow make it better. "They've been, meeting their half-siblings ever since." Every Sunday, like Emily said. Sunday. While I was at work. The pieces snapped together in my head like jagged glass. I had never questioned why they always seemed to be out on Sundays. They'd say they were going to the mall, to a friend's house, to grab lunch. And I believed them. Because why wouldn't I? But they hadn't been going to the mall. They hadn't been meeting friends. They had been meeting his kids. Her other family. Who is he? My voice came out flat, almost unrecognizable. Tyler hesitated again. I don't think I should. Who is he? I roared. My daughter flinched, fresh tears spilling down her face. Tyler stammered something, but I didn't hear it. My own pulse was too loud, too deafening. Text me his name, I said. Right now. Tyler hesitated for one last second. Then the notification popped up on my screen. I looked at the name, and the moment I saw it, something inside me snapped that I stared at the name on my screen, my vision blurring at the edges. Eric Dawson. It meant nothing to me. No recognition, no old memories resurfacing, no face attached to the name. Just two words on a screen, hollow and unfamiliar. Yet they carried the weight of my entire and life crumbling beneath me. This was the man who had taken my wife, who had stolen my daughter's loyalty, who had built a secret family with the woman I had loved for over a decade. And I had never even heard his name before. A burning heat surged through my veins, making my fingers tremble around the phone. I exhaled slowly, trying to control the rage threatening to rip me apart from the inside. The walls of my own home felt like they were closing in, suffocating me, mocking me for my ignorance. I looked up at Emily, my daughter, my own flesh and blood, who was still frozen in front of me, tears streaking her face. You knew, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She sobbed. Dad, please. You knew, I repeated louder this time. For a year. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Sophie stood behind her, gripping the edge of the couch like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She looked absolutely terrified, her face pale, her breathing uneven, but she hadn't denied it. Neither of them had. My chest tightened, a sharp, suffocating pressure pressing against my ribs. My own daughters. My throat felt raw, strangled by emotions too big to process all at once. You sat across from me at the dinner table, you smiled at me, you told me you loved me, and the whole time you were sneaking off to be part of her new life? Her new family. Emily sobbed harder, covering her face with her hands. Sophie turned away, staring at the floor, her shoulders shaking. I wanted to scream, to rip something apart, to do anything other than stand there and drown in my own humiliation. I forced myself to breathe. I needed answers before I completely lost my grip. Where is she? I asked, my voice tight. Neither of them answered. I took a step forward. Where is she? Sophie flinched, her small voice barely audible. She's with him. Where? Emily sniffled. At his house. I clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth might crack. I didn't even know where this bastard lived. I turned back to my phone, my fingers moving on instinct. If she was with him, then she sure as hell wasn't answering my calls. But there was another way. I opened the family tracking app again. The little message, location not available, stared back at me like a taunt. I exhaled sharply, then scrolled down. Emily. Sophie. Both their locations were still active. Emily must have realized what I was doing because her eyes went wide in horror. Dad, no, too late. I tapped on the last known location she had visited. A house. Not far. 15 minutes away. My hands curled into fists. I turned toward the door. Emily let out a choked sob. Dad, please don't go. I froze mid-step and looked at her. Why? My voice was dangerously quiet. She hesitated, her lips trembling. I tilted my head slightly. You weren't worried when she went there. You weren't worried when you went there every Sunday. But now suddenly you're begging me to stay. Emily's face crumpled. It won't change anything, she whispered. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. I don't give a damn about changing anything. I want the truth. And then I walked out. I didn't remember getting into my car. Didn't remember pulling out of the driveway. All I knew was the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my skull as I sped through the dark streets, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. The GPS voice calmly guided me toward the address, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. My wife had built an entire life behind my back, a family behind my back, and no one had told me, not my daughters, not her friends, not the neighbors, not even AF *****ing whisper had reached me. Was I really that much of a joke? That blind? That pathetic? I didn't want to think about it. Not now. I turned onto a quiet suburban street lined with perfect little houses, each one bathed in the soft glow of porch lights. And then there it was, a two-story home, expensive-looking, clean-cut lawn, a sleek, black luxury car parked neatly in the driveway. My stomach twisted violently. This was it. I parked a few houses down, my hands shaking as I turned off the engine. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the house that had taken everything from me. Then, just as I was about to open the door, the front porch light flicked on. I went completely still. The door opened, and there she was, my wife. She stepped outside, wrapped in a cozy-looking cardigan, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. She looked comfortable, at home. She smiled, not at me, at him. Eric Dawson stepped out onto the porch behind her, laughing softly as he pulled on his jacket. He was tall, handsome, the kind of guy who probably golfed on weekends and drank overpriced whiskey with other rich pricks just like him. And then he leaned in and kissed her. Not just a quick peck, not some hesitant, guilty thing. A deep, familiar kiss. The kind that spoke of time, of intimacy. My stomach turned to ice. I had been married to this woman for over a decade, and I had never seen her kiss me like that. She looked happy, at ease, like she belonged there, like I was the stranger. I clenched my jaw, my fingernails digging into my palms. I could march up there, make a scene, demand answers, throw fists, break something. But no, I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of making me look like a crazed, bitter husband. She had already humiliated me enough. Instead, I pulled out my phone, lifted it just enough to snap a single photo of the two of them, her lips still pressed against his, her hand resting comfortably on his chest. Then, without another word, I put the car in drive. And I left. The drive home was a blur. My hands felt numb on the wheel, my brain running at a speed I couldn't keep up with. The world outside my car was just a smear of headlights and streetlights, but all I could see was her. The way she looked at him. The way she touched him, leaned into him, kissed him. So effortless. So natural. I had spent over a decade with this woman. Built a life with her. Worked my ass off to provide for her, for our daughters. And yet, the way she had smiled at that man, it was like I had never existed at all. Like I had been nothing more than a placeholder. A convenient background character in the real story she had been writing behind my back. My jaw locked so tight it hurt. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I didn't even remember making the turns that got me there. My body had been running on autopilot, my mind stuck in a loop of memories that had all been rewritten in an instant. I parked the car, took a deep breath. I had two choices. I could go inside and pretend I hadn't seen what I saw. I could sit my daughters down, try to have some pathetic, broken conversation about trust and betrayal. I could wait for my wife to come home, watch her lie to my face, and pretend I didn't already have the truth burned into my skull. Or I could burn the whole house down. Metaphorically. I stepped out of the car. Walked up the driveway. Through the front door. Emily and Sophie were still in the living room, their phones clutched in their hands like lifelines. The second I entered, they snapped their heads up. They knew. They knew. The way their eyes darted between each other, the way Sophie visibly shrank into the couch, the way Emily's fingers twitched like she wanted to grab me, stop me, slow me down before I did something she couldn't control, it was all the confirmation I needed. I tossed my keys onto the table. The sound was deafening in the silence. "Dad," Emily whispered, her voice thick with fear. I saw everything?" My voice was steady, too steady. I felt like a man balancing on the edge of a cliff, one wrong move from toppling over. No more lies. No more bulls. No more excuses. Emily sucked in a sharp breath. Sophie looked like she might throw up. Dad, please, Emily tried again. Mom, I snapped my head toward her. What? My voice was sharp, venomous. Mom, what? Mom has her reasons? Mom wasn't happy? Mom never meant to hurt me. Emily flinched. Sophie wiped her eyes, refusing to look up. Do you even understand what you've done? I asked, looking between them. Do you get what this means? They didn't answer. Of course they didn't. I shook my head, letting out a humorless laugh. I was going to fight for this family, you know that? If she had told me she was unhappy, I would have fought for her. If she had told me she needed more, I would have worked harder. If she had just said something, I would have done anything to fix it. Emily's face twisted in pain. But instead, I exhaled sharply. Instead, she fed some guy for years. Had his kids. Built his life. And you two just, what? Went along with it? Smiled at me while you snuck off to play happy family with the guy who ruined my marriage. Sophie's breath hitched. We didn't mean stop. I held up a hand. Don't give me that. She clamped her mouth shut. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then I took out my phone. Held it up so they could see the screen. The picture I had taken. Their mother, pressed against another man. Their lips still locked. Her body still wrapped in him. The color drained from Emily's face. Sophie let out a quiet, choked sound. I want you both to look at this, I said coldly. Really look at it. Neither of them moved. So I took a step closer, shoving the screen into Emily's line of sight. This is what she chose. My voice was eerily calm. This is who she picked. Not me. Not the man who raised you. Not the man who spent years breaking his back to give you a good life. Not the man who would have done anything for this family. Emily's lip trembled. She picked him. Tears slid down her cheeks, but I felt nothing. She lied to me. I continued. She lied to you, and instead of standing by me, your own father, you helped her. I could see the shame creeping in now, the realization, the guilt, but it didn't matter. It was too late. I pulled back the phone, staring down at the image one last time. Then, without another word, I deleted it. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Emily whispered, "What are you going to do?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. I turned away, heading upstairs, leaving them sitting there in their shame. I needed to think. I needed to figure out my next move. And I needed to do it before she came home. I locked the bedroom door behind me, but it didn't make a difference. The house still felt infected, polluted, like the walls themselves had absorbed every lie, every betrayal, and were pressing in around me, suffocating me with the weight of it all. I sank onto the edge of the bed, pressing my hands together, my fingers digging into my palms. I had spent my entire life building something I thought was real, and now I was standing in the ruins of it. The worst part? I didn't even know what to do next. Divorce? That was the obvious answer. That was what a man in my position should do. Pack her things, throw them onto the lawn, file the papers, and walk away. But I wasn't stupid. Divorce wasn't just signing a piece of paper and calling it a day. There were the finances. The house. The kids, if they could even still be called mine after what they'd done. Would she fight me for custody? Would she try to take half of everything I had worked for, half of everything I had given her, while she had been sleeping in another man's bed? I had no idea. I leaned forward, rubbing my temples, trying to push down the rage rising in my chest. Then my phone buzzed. I grabbed it instinctively. A part of me expected it to be her. Maybe she had finally grown a conscience, finally realized she had been caught, finally decided to crawl back home with whatever pathetic excuse she had prepared. But it wasn't her. It was a text. Unknown number. Hey, I think we need to talk. I frowned. A moment later, another message appeared. Unknown number. It's Eric. I went completely still. Eric. Him. The audacity. I stared at the name, at the little gray text bubble sitting there like it was just some casual message. Like this was some normal, everyday conversation between two guys who weren't about to tear each other's lives apart. I should have ignored him. Should have deleted the text, blocked the number, refused to give him the satisfaction of a response. But I couldn't. Instead, I typed back. Me. Talk about what? How you've been screwing my wife. 3 dots appeared. He was typing. Then another message popped up. Eric, I know you're angry. I would be too. But this isn't just about you and her. It's about the kids. I let out a hollow, humorless laugh. The kids. He was talking to me about my own damn kids. I gripped the phone so tightly my fingers ached. Me, you don't get to talk to me about my kids. Eric, I'm not trying to start a fight. I just think you deserve to know everything. Can we meet? A meetup. Face to face. I clenched my jaw so hard I thought I might crack a tooth. What the hell could he possibly have to say to me? What excuse could he give? What could he possibly add to this situation that I didn't already know? I should have ignored him. I should have. But something inside me, some burning, twisted curiosity, refused to let this go. I needed to look this man in the eye. I needed to hear what he had to say. And then I needed to decide what I was going to do next. So I typed back. Me. Where? A second later, another message popped up. Eric, the diner on 5th. Midnight. No one else. Just us. I stared at the screen. Then I exhaled sharply, stood up, grabbed my jacket, and walked out the door. The diner was nearly empty when I arrived. A few tired-looking waitresses, a trucker nursing a cup of coffee, an old man reading a newspaper in the corner. The smell of burnt coffee and grease hung in the air, mixing with the low hum of the neon sign flickering in the window. And then there he was, Eric Dawson, sitting in a booth near the back, a cup of coffee in front of him, perfectly at ease. I took a moment to really look at him. He wasn't some sleazy lowlife. He wasn't a greasy, pathetic loser who had lucked into sleeping with another man's wife. He looked like me. A guy in his 40s, clean-shaven, well-dressed, successful. The kind of man people probably respected. And I hated him for it. He looked up as I approached. Hey, he said, nodding slightly. I slid into the seat across from him. I didn't say a word. A waitress appeared asking if I wanted anything. I waved her off. Then I turned my full attention to him. You've got 5 minutes, I said coldly. Say what you need to say. Eric exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Look, I'm not gonna sit here and give you some bull's asterisk apology. I know what I did. I know what she did. And I know none of this makes it better. I didn't respond. Just watched him. But I think you should know the truth, he continued. The whole truth. I narrowed my eyes. What the hell does that mean? He hesitated. Then he leaned forward slightly. She told me you knew. My breath stalled. What? She told me that your marriage was already over, he said. That you were just staying together for the kids. That you had an arrangement. She told me you were seeing other people too. I felt my stomach lurch. That's why I never questioned it, Eric continued. She told me you were only still living together because neither of you wanted to deal with the hassle of a divorce. That you had both moved on in your own ways. I stared at him, my mind reeling. Was this a lie? Another manipulation? Or had she really told him that? Had she rewritten our entire marriage? Twisted the narrative so she could justify years of deception? I swallowed hard, my throat burning. And you just believed that? Eric held my gaze. Wouldn't you? I clenched my fists under the table. I had spent so long wondering how she had hidden it so well. Wondering how she had kept the truth buried for so long without someone slipping up. And now I knew. She hadn't just lied to me. She had lied to him too. She's leaving you, Eric said after a moment. She told me she's moving in next month. She was going to tell you soon. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped my lips. So that's what this is, I said. You wanted to meet up so you could warn me before she dropped the bomb. Eric exhaled, looking down at his coffee. I wanted to meet up because I'm a father too. And if the situation were reversed, I'd want to know. I didn't answer. Because for the first time that night, I didn't know what to say. My wife had built a life behind my back. And now it was about to become official. She wasn't just cheating. She was leaving. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at him. I wanted to believe this was some kind of game. That Eric was feeding me a carefully crafted lie, trying to paint himself as innocent in all of this. But deep down, I knew better. She would say something like that. It explained everything, the secrecy, the confidence, the way she had walked in and out of my life like she was already halfway gone. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't some reckless mistake. She had been phasing me out. Slowly, methodically, preparing for the day when she could finally cut the last thread and walk away clean. She had been planning to leave me. And she had let me be the last to know. I exhaled sharply, pushing my fingers against my temples. So that's it, huh? My voice was hoarse. She's just going to pack up and leave? Move in with you and your perfect little family. Eric hesitated. That's what she says. But I lifted my head, narrowing my eyes. But what? He shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the diner window as if checking to make sure no one could overhear us. I don't know if she's telling me the truth either. I blinked. What the hell does that mean? Eric sighed, rubbing his jaw. Look, I told you I believed her when she said you knew. I believed her when she told me you were both just coexisting, waiting for the right time to split. I didn't think I was breaking up a marriage. But lately, she's been off. I let out a humorless laugh. Off? You just described my entire relationship with her. Eric gave me a tight smile, but it faded quickly. No, I don't think she's being honest with me either. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. Explain. He hesitated again, then finally muttered, I think she's still lying. I don't think she ever planned to actually tell you. I think she was waiting for you to find out. A cold weight settled in my stomach. She was hoping I'd catch her? Eric nodded slowly. Think about it. If she told you herself, she'd have to be the bad guy. She'd have to deal with the fallout, the confrontation, the guilt. But if you found out on your own, she could play the victim. She could say it just happened, that she never meant for you to get hurt. I clenched my jaw. It made sense. Too much damn sense. She had turned my daughters against me. She had rewritten our entire history. And now, she had been waiting for me to catch her red-handed, so she wouldn't have to own up to anything. Because she wasn't just a liar. She was a coward. I let out a slow, measured breath, trying to keep the fury in check. And what about you? I asked. If you think she's still lying, why the hell are you still with her? Eric hesitated, looking down at his coffee. Because I fell for it. I believed her. And by the time I started questioning things, it was too late. I scoffed. Too late for what? To grow a conscience. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. I thought she loved me, he admitted after a moment. I thought we were building something real. But now he shook his head. Now I don't know if I'm just the next guy in line. I frowned. What are you talking about? Eric looked up, his expression unreadable. You ever think that maybe we're both just stepping stones? The words hit harder than I expected. Because yeah, I had thought about it. I had spent the last 12 years thinking I was the main character in my own marriage, the center of my wife's world. But maybe I had just been a phase. A placeholder. A bridge between whatever life she had before me and whatever life she really wanted. And now Eric was realizing the same damn thing. I leaned back in my seat, letting the weight of it all sink in. My wife had spent years living a double life. And now even the man she had left me for was starting to see the cracks in her story. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt something close to clarity. I had been so caught up in my own anger, my own humiliation, that I hadn't stopped to ask the most important question. What does she really want? Because if Eric was right, if she hadn't been planning to tell me, then what the hell was her plan? Was she going to stay with me until I eventually put the pieces together? Was she waiting for some convenient excuse to finally leave? Or was there something else? Something worse? I looked back at Eric, studying him. Does she know you're here? I asked. He shook his head. Good. I slid out of the booth and stood up, reaching for my wallet. Eric frowned. Where are you going? I threw a few bills onto the table. Home. He stared at me, confused. What are you gonna do? I met his gaze, and for the first time that night I smiled. I'm gonna flip the script. The house was dark when I got back. The living room was empty, the TV off, the lights dim. My daughters had probably gone to bed. And my wife, she still wasn't home. I checked my watch. 1:47 a.m. She should have been back by now. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me as I walked upstairs, stepping into our bedroom. My bedroom now. The room I had shared with her for over a decade. The room where we had once made plans for the future, whispered about growing old together. All of it was a lie. But now I had the upper hand. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulled out my phone, and opened our shared banking app. A few taps later, I had frozen every joint account. A few more taps, and I had changed the password to our savings. Then I pulled up my email and started drafting the first letter to my lawyer. I wasn't going to let her blindside me. I wasn't going to let her control the narrative. By the time she walked through that door, everything she thought she had built with Eric, every plan, every lie, every excuse was going to come crumbling down. Because for the first time since this all started, I wasn't playing her game. She was playing mine. I sat there in the dark, my phone still in my hand, listening to the silence of the house. It was strange, this home I had built, this life I had poured everything into, felt like it didn't even belong to me anymore. It was just a waiting room now. A place where I sat, breathing in the betrayal, waiting for my wife to walk through the door so I could finally watch her world burn. I checked the time again. 2:14 a.m. Still no sign of her. I wasn't surprised. If she was with Eric, she was probably stalling. Maybe she had gotten word that I knew. Maybe she was sitting in his luxury car, rehearsing her lines, trying to figure out how to spin this. I almost wished she would stay the night there. At least then I wouldn't have to see her face. But just as the thought crossed my mind, I heard the unmistakable sound of tires rolling into the driveway. I didn't move. Didn't blink. Just sat there, gripping my phone, listening as the engine cut off. A moment later, the front door creaked open. Soft footsteps. Then her voice. "Oh my God, are you still awake?" I turned my head slowly. She stood in the doorway of our bedroom, one hand on her hip, a casual smirk tugging at her lips like nothing was wrong. Like she hadn't just spent the entire night in another man's arms. Like she hadn't blown up our entire life. I didn't answer. Just let my gaze drag over her. Her hair was slightly messy, like she had tried to smooth it down but didn't care enough to really fix it. Her makeup was mostly wiped off, but there were faint smudges of mascara beneath her eyes. And the cardigan she had been wearing at Eric's place, the one she had wrapped around herself when she kissed him, was still draped over her shoulders. I let out a slow breath through my nose. "I saw you." My voice was quiet, controlled. She froze. For a split second, I saw something flicker across her face. Fear? Regret? No. Something worse. Calculation. She was already adjusting. Already deciding how to play this. Her smirk vanished, and she let out a small, irritated sigh. "Saw me where?" I leaned back against the headboard. "At his house." The room went dead silent. She blinked, tilted her head slightly like she was trying to gauge how much I knew. Then she laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, please," she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "You drove all the way there? That's just Jesus, that's embarrassing." Something inside me cracked. Embarrassing. That was what she thought this was. Not heartbreaking. Not devastating. Not the single worst night of my life. Just embarrassing. I exhaled slowly, gripping my phone tighter, forcing my voice to stay steady. "You don't even have the decency to deny it, huh?" She let out another laugh, but this one was different. Tense. Edged with something sharp. "What's the point?" she said with a shrug. "You obviously already made up your mind. What, did you follow me there? Sit outside like some kind of stalker?" My jaw tightened. "Our daughter told me." That shut her up. She went still, her smirk faltering for the first time. "What?" she said quietly. I tilted my head. "Emily," she told Tyler. And I heard her. Her lips parted slightly, her breathing uneven now. She wouldn't. She did. I let the words sink in. Let them settle between us like a loaded gun on the table. She blinked rapidly, processing. I could see the gears turning in her head, working overtime, trying to regain control, trying to flip this back on me. And then, just like that, her expression changed. She rolled her eyes again, shaking her head. "You're being dramatic." I stared at her. "You're seriously going to act like this is some big scandal?" She crossed her arms, raising a brow. "Jesus, grow up. You act like we were some perfect couple. Like we didn't stop being real years ago. I didn't react. Just let her talk. That's what pisses me off the most, she continued. The fact that you're pretending you didn't see this coming. What, you thought we were happy? I didn't answer. Because honestly, I had. Not perfect, no. Not a fairy tale. But happy enough. And that was the difference between us. I had been content. She had been waiting for an escape. She sighed again, shaking her head. I was going to tell you soon. I was just waiting for the right moment. The right moment, I echoed. She shrugged. Yeah, but you had to go and ruin it. Had to go digging. Had to turn this into some giant thing. I felt something dark and ugly rise in my chest. This is a giant thing, I said, my voice low. You threw away our marriage. You turned our daughters against me. You, oh my God, stop acting like a victim, she snapped, throwing up her hands. You're not some tragic hero, okay? You're just, she exhaled sharply, shaking her head. You're just boring. The word hit like a slap. Boring. That's what I was to her. Not a husband. Not a partner. Not the father of her children. Just boring. My fingers curled into fists. I forced myself to breathe through the red-hot anger curling in my stomach. You're unbelievable, I muttered. She huffed. No, you are. You're sitting here, acting like I cheated on you. I blinked. You did cheat on me. She snorted. Oh, please. We haven't been in love in years. Be honest. When was the last time we even slept together? When was the last time you actually wanted me? My entire body tensed. That's not... It's true, she snapped. You checked out of this marriage a long time ago, and so did I. The only difference is I did something about it. I clenched my jaw so tightly it ached. She really believed that. She genuinely believed that I had just given up. That my loyalty, my effort, my love had all been meaningless just because I wasn't some rich asshole with a fancy car and a thrilling lifestyle. She had rewritten our entire history, and in her version, she was the hero. I exhaled slowly. You're a piece of work. You know that? She smirked. And yet, Eric still picked me. I felt something inside me snap. I stood up so fast that the chair scraped against the floor. Her smirk wavered. I already called a lawyer, I said coldly. I froze our accounts, changed every password. And by the time the sun comes up, I'll have the divorce papers drafted. For the first time all night, I saw fear in her eyes. What? She whispered. You're done playing house, I said. You don't get to walk away clean. You don't get to win. Her mouth opened and closed, her brain short-circuiting. You want it out? I said. Fine. But you don't get a single penny of mine on your way out the door. And then, without waiting for a response, I walked out of the room. Because for the first time in this whole nightmare, I was the one leaving her. The house felt different after that. Like something had shifted. Like the very foundation of it had cracked open, letting in something cold and unfamiliar. I walked downstairs, gripping the railing a little too tight, my mind still reeling from what had just happened. I had finally said it. Finally drawn the line. And for the first time in this whole mess, I felt like I was the one in control. I reached the kitchen, opened the fridge without thinking, then just stood there, staring blankly at the rows of food. Nothing looked appetizing. My stomach was in knots, twisted too tight to untangle. Footsteps. Soft. Careful. I closed the fridge door and turned. Emily stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself, her face still blotchy from crying. She didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, looking small. Looking scared. I exhaled, pinching the bridge of my nose. What? Her lower lip trembled. Is it true? I frowned. Is what true? She hesitated. The divorce. I met her gaze, my jaw tight. Yeah. Her breath hitched. Dad, you don't stop. My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I couldn't help it. Don't try to talk me out of this. Don't defend her. Emily flinched, and for a moment I regretted snapping. But then she let out a shaky breath and whispered, I'm not. That surprised me. I watched as she stepped further into the kitchen, her hands twisting together nervously. I didn't think it would happen this fast. I let out a dry, humorless chuckle. I didn't think any of this would happen, but here we are. She swallowed hard, staring down at the floor. What happens now? I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. Yeah? Now your mother gets exactly what she wanted. She gets her new life. Her new family. Her new man. My voice darkened. And she gets to do it without a single cent from me. Emily's head snapped up. What? I shrugged. I already locked everything down. She won't get our savings. Won't get the house. She'll have to fight me for everything. Emily's face paled. Dad, she what? I challenged. She deserves it? She shook her head quickly. No, that's not. She hesitated. Bit her lip. Then, after a long pause, she whispered she doesn't know what she's doing. I stiffened. Excuse me. Emily let out a shaky breath like she was gathering her courage. She's not thinking, Dad. She's making this decision because she thinks it's what she wants. But I don't think she's actually planned anything beyond this moment. I frowned. You think she's gonna change her mind? Emily hesitated. I don't know. But I do know she's never been good at thinking ahead. Something about the way she said that made my stomach twist. I pushed off the counter, stepping closer. Emily, what aren't you telling me? She looked at me, her eyes glistening. And then finally she whispered she doesn't even have a place to go. I blinked. What? She thinks Eric is going to take care of her. She thinks she'll move in with him, that it'll all be fine. But he hasn't actually told her she can live there yet. She just assumed. I stared at her. I had spent all this time thinking my wife had everything figured out. That she had some master plan. That she had been strategic about this. But if Emily was telling the truth, if she had just assumed Eric would take her in, then she had just thrown her entire life away on a gamble. And she was about to lose. I exhaled sharply. You're kidding. Emily shook her head. I heard her talking to Sophie about it. She told her not to worry, that it would all work out. She swallowed hard. She doesn't even have a backup plan, Dad. She's burning everything down without a way out. I ran a hand over my face, my mind spinning. So that was it. She had spent all these years lying, manipulating, controlling the narrative. But when it came down to it, she wasn't a mastermind. She was just reckless. I let out a slow breath, letting the reality of it settle in. Well, I murmured, guess she's about to learn the hard way. Emily's face crumpled. Dad, what? I asked, exhausted. She hesitated. Then, finally, she whispered, I don't know if I can do this. I frowned. Do what? She sniffled. I don't know if I can go with her. That made me pause. Of all the things I had expected, that wasn't one of them. I stared at her, searching her face. You were ready to leave me behind a few hours ago. She flinched. I know. A tear slipped down her cheek. But I didn't think it would feel like this. I swallowed hard. Like what? Emily wrapped her arms around herself. Like I ruined everything. For the first time since this nightmare started, I actually saw my daughter. Not as some co-conspirator. Not as some extension of her mother's betrayal. Just a kid. A scared, broken kid who had made a mistake. And right then, something in me softened. I exhaled slowly, then stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. You didn't ruin everything, Emily. Her lip trembled. Then why does it feel like I did? I squeezed her shoulder gently. Because you trusted the wrong person. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She let out a shaky breath, then looked up at me with pleading eyes. I just want everything to go back to how it was. My chest ached. Because I knew the truth. Nothing was ever going back to how it was. But that didn't mean I couldn't try to fix what was left. I let out a slow breath. I don't know what's going to happen next, Emily. But I do know one thing. She sniffled. What? I looked her dead in the eyes. You don't have to go with her. Her breath hitched. For the first time all night, I saw a flicker of relief in her expression. She nodded, just barely. Okay. I gave her shoulder one last squeeze, then turned away, heading for the stairs. Because now I had a new plan. My wife had spent all these years building her escape. But she was about to find out exactly what it felt like to have the door slammed in her face. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my home office, the one place in this house that still felt like mine, sifting through years of financial records, joint accounts, mortgage papers. Every single thing that tied me to her. By the time the sun came up, I had everything I needed. Our accounts were frozen. The lawyer had responded he was drafting up the divorce papers as we spoke. I had even contacted a realtor just to get ahead of things. If I had to sell this house, I'd do it on my terms, not because she thought she could take half of it. She had spent years making her exit plan. But now she was going to realize she had nothing. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes, exhaustion creeping into my bones. Then, right on cue, I heard the sound of movement upstairs. She was awake, and she had no idea what was about to hit her. I stood up, stretching my stiff muscles, then walked into the kitchen just as she came down the stairs. Her hair was a mess. She was still in her sleep clothes, one of my old t-shirts, an insult now, considering who had been touching her just hours ago. She barely even looked at me as she poured herself a cup of coffee, like nothing had happened, like she was the one who had the upper hand here. I watched her for a moment, studying her, wondering how she could possibly think this was going to play out. Did she think I would break down? Beg her to stay? Did she think she had backed me into a corner? She had no clue. I waited until she took a sip of her coffee, then said, "So, when were you planning on telling me?" She didn't even blink. "About what?" I clenched my jaw. "About the fact that you were leaving, moving in with Eric." She smirked, actually smirked. "Oh, so that's what you're upset about now," she said, shaking her head. "God, you're exhausting." I felt my fingers twitch at my sides, but I forced myself to stay calm. "So what was the plan?" I asked, my voice even. "Were you going to tell me this week? Next month? Or were you just hoping I'd get tired of the lies and leave first?" She sighed dramatically, like this whole conversation was beneath her. "Does it even matter? You already know now." I tilted my head. "Yeah, I do." She arched a brow. "So? What now? You gonna cry? Throw a tantrum?" She took another sip of coffee, watching me over the rim of her mug like she had already won. "Or are you just gonna accept it like an adult?" I let the silence stretch between us. Let her sit there, basking in her arrogance. Then slowly, I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table between us. She frowned. "What's that?" I unlocked the screen, clicked on the banking app. Then I turned it toward her. The second she saw the frozen status on all our joint accounts, her face paled. I didn't say a word. Didn't need to. She dropped the coffee cup onto the counter, her breathing turning sharp. "What the F **** did you do?" I crossed my arms. "I cut you off." Her eyes snapped up to mine, burning with rage. "You had no right. I had every right." My voice was low. "Dangerous. You don't get to use me as a backup plan. You don't get to walk away from this marriage and still have access to my money." Her nostrils flared. "That's our money." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "No. It's mine. You haven't worked in years. I was the one who kept this house running, paid the bills, took care of everything. And now?" I shook my head. "Now you're on your own." She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, like she couldn't process what was happening. "Good. Let her feel it. Let her feel what it was like to have the rug ripped out from under her." She finally snapped out of it, shaking her head. "You're being a child. This is insane. You can't just—" "Oh, but I can," I interrupted, stepping closer. And I did. I watched her, waiting for the realization to really sink in. "You thought you could just walk out and have it all, huh? Thought you could run off to Eric and still have a safety net?" I leaned in, lowering my voice. "Well, guess what? He's your problem now." Her breathing turned shallow. I could see it the moment she realized I knew. I knew about her assumptions. About the fact that Eric hadn't actually told her she could move in. That she had been banking on me rolling over and letting her walk away with everything. She had no backup plan, and I had just slammed the door on her only way out. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to keep her composure. "Fine," she said, her voice tight. "Then I'll take the house." I smiled. "No, you won't." Her eye twitched. "Excuse me." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Then I tossed it onto the counter. She hesitated, then picked it up. Her eyes scanned it quickly. Then her face twisted in horror. She looked up at me, shaking. I called a realtor," I said simply. "This house is going on the market. Today." She looked like she wanted to scream. Like she wanted to rip the paper in half and pretend it didn't exist. But it did. And there wasn't a damn thing she could do about it. "You can't sell this house," she spat. "I live here." I shrugged. "Not for long." Her hands clenched into fists. "You bastard." I smiled. No, I just finally woke up. She stood there, shaking, breathing hard, her entire world crashing down around her. And I let her. Because for the first time in years, I was finally free. She didn't speak at first. Just stood there, gripping the piece of paper like it was the last thing tethering her to reality. Her breaths were sharp, uneven, her face caught somewhere between rage and disbelief. She had spent years lying, manipulating, setting the stage for her grand exit. But now she was realizing the truth. She had nothing. No money, no house, no safety net, and worst of all, she had no control. I watched her slowly lower the paper, her fingers still clenched around it so tightly the edges had crumpled. She looked up at me, her eyes blazing, but this time, there was something else there. Panic. You think this is over? Her voice was sharp, but there was a tremor in it. You think you can just shut me out? I tilted my head. That's exactly what I did. Her hands curled into fists. You're spiteful. You're doing this just to punish me. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Punish you? I shook my head. No, this isn't punishment. This is consequences. Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to argue. But for once, she had no words. So I kept going. For years you lied to me. For years you built this life behind my back. You made our daughters part of it. Turned them against me. Let me sit here like an idiot while you played house with another man. I took a step forward, and for the first time ever, she took a step back. And now? Now you want to stand here and act like I'm the villain. She swallowed hard. I leaned in slightly. No, sweetheart. You just finally ran out of people to lie to. Silence. The kind of silence that settles deep, that presses against your ribs like a heavy weight. She had nothing left to say, because she knew I was right. Her eyes darted away from mine, her breathing uneven. Then, slowly, she folded the paper in half, pressing her lips together like she was gathering her thoughts. And when she finally spoke, her voice was different, quieter, almost controlled. Fine, she murmured, nodding to herself. You want to do this? You want to make this ugly? She exhaled sharply, looking back up at me, her eyes hard. Then let's make it ugly. I arched a brow. That a threat? She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Oh, it's a promise. I crossed my arms, unimpressed. Go ahead. Take your best shot. She tilted her head slightly, sizing me up. Then she said, the kids will pick me. I didn't flinch, didn't react. She saw that, but she pushed anyway. They love me, she continued, stepping closer. I'm the one who's always been there for them. I'm the one they talk to, the one they trust. They'll stay with me. I let out a slow breath, my jaw tightening. She wanted a reaction. She needed one, because deep down she wasn't sure. And she hated that. I kept my voice steady. Emily already told me she's not going with you. Her entire face changed, like I had slapped her, like the ground had just cracked open beneath her feet. What? She whispered. I nodded slowly. She came to me last night, said she couldn't do it, said she didn't want to go with you. For the first time since this whole thing started, my wife, the woman who had lied and manipulated her way through everything, was completely, utterly speechless. She blinked rapidly, shaking her head. No, no, she wouldn't. She did. Her breathing turned ragged. She's just confused. No, I interrupted. She finally saw you for who you really are. Her whole body stiffened. And that was when I knew. This was the real wound. Not the money, not the house, not even Eric. It was losing the kids. She could handle me fighting back. She could handle me taking her security away. But losing them? That was the one thing she hadn't prepared for. I exhaled, shaking my head. You spent years making sure they picked you. You turned them against me. And for what? I let out a dry laugh. So they could finally see what kind of person you really are? Her face crumpled. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw something crack in her. Regret. But she shoved it down almost instantly, her expression hardening again. You think you've won, she muttered. I sighed. This isn't a game. There is no winning here. You lost the second you decided this marriage wasn't enough for you. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward the stairs. What about Sophie? I hesitated. Because I didn't know about Sophie. She had been quieter, less involved in this whole mess. She had cried last night, but she hadn't told me what she wanted. My wife saw that hesitation, and she smirked. That's what I thought, she said, her voice smug. Sophie loves me. She's coming with me. I stayed quiet, because maybe she was right. Maybe Sophie would go with her. But at that moment, I realized something. It didn't matter, because even if she did take Sophie, even if this divorce got messy, even if I lost the house, I had already taken away the one thing she truly cared about. Her control. She wasn't calling the shots anymore. I leaned forward, meeting her gaze. I'm filing for full custody. Her eyes went wide. I nodded. Yeah, you heard me. She let out a sharp, breathy laugh. You can't be serious. Dead serious. You wouldn't dare. I tilted my head. I dared to freeze the accounts. I dared to put the house on the market. What makes you think I won't fight for my kids? Her breath hitched. She had nothing to say to that, because deep down she knew the truth. She wasn't a good mother. She had used them, manipulated them. And now? Now they were old enough to make their own decisions. And at least one of them had already picked me. I stepped back, grabbing my car keys from the counter. Start packing. She scoffed. Excuse me. I turned toward the door. I want you out by the end of the week. She let out a short, bitter laugh. You don't get to tell me what to do. I turned my head, meeting her gaze one last time. I already did. Then I walked out. Because for the first time in years, I didn't have to stay and listen to her lies. I didn't have to fight for her approval. I didn't have to prove anything. I was done. And she was finally out of my life.